Everything we've been taught about human evolution is incomplete. I'm 58 years old now, and for the past 28 years, I've been sitting on genetic evidence that rewrites our understanding of hominid development in North America. What I discovered about Bigfoot's true origin challenges every assumption modern anthropology has made about the peopling of the Americas. My name is Dr. Marcus Chen. I'm a molecular anthropologist formerly with the Smithsonian Institution, and this is the story that cost me my career, my reputation, and nearly my life. The truth isn't that Bigfoot is an undiscovered ape. It's far more unsettling than that. What I found in the DNA suggests these creatures are something we never anticipated, an evolutionary branch that diverged from our own ancestors, a parallel development that survived when it should have gone extinct, a living fossil that proves we were never alone on this continent. For 3 decades, I kept this secret, published sanitized research, and watched as the scientific community ridiculed what they didn't understand. But some truths are too important to die with you. Some discoveries belong to humanity, regardless of the cost. I was 30 years old, a newly hired postdoctoral researcher at the Smithsonian Institution, specializing in ancient DNA extraction and hominid genetics. My expertise was recovering genetic material from degraded samples, fossils, bones, museum specimens, decades old. I never expected that expertise would lead me to discover a living species we thought impossible. The Forest Service had sent unusual primate hair samples to the Smithsonian, samples they'd attributed to bears despite the morphology being completely wrong. I was dispatched to the Pacific Northwest to consult, to spend a week examining the samples in a makeshift laboratory at a ranger station 40 miles from the nearest town. I packed my equipment expecting to identify some known species, write a brief report, and return to Washington, D.C. within days. The first day in that temporary lab changed everything. Under the microscope, the hair's medullary structure was unlike any cataloged primate I'd studied. The pattern was wrong, too organized for bear, too unusual for any North American species. I ran a preliminary DNA extraction expecting contamination, perhaps human hair mixed with animal samples. When the results came back showing 96.8% matched human DNA, I assumed exactly that, contamination. The remaining 3.2% didn't match any species in our genetic databases. But that had to be degradation, sequencing error, something explainable. I ran a second test, identical results, then a third using different extraction methods, different primers, different everything. Same outcome, 96.8% human, 3.2% unknown. My training told me this was impossible. My data told me otherwise. Tom Whitaker, the Forest Service ranger who'd collected the samples, offered to show me the collection site. He was a weathered man in his 50s, skeptical of cryptozoology, but cooperative with scientific inquiry. We hiked 2 hours into dense old-growth forest, Douglas fir and western hemlock rising like cathedral columns, the ground carpeted in ferns and moss. The elevation reached 3,200 feet, the air thin and crisp with late September cold. The site was along a game trail near a salmon-bearing stream. Multiple hair samples had been snagged on brambles and low-hanging branches. I photographed everything, documenting the scene with scientific precision. Then I noticed the height of the snags, 7 to 8 feet off the ground, far too high for any bear, even standing on hind legs. Late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, and fog was beginning to roll in as the temperature dropped. That's when I smelled it, musky, organic, like wet fur and rich earth, but stronger than any animal I'd encountered. The forest went silent. No bird calls, no insect sounds, just absolute stillness that made my skin prickle. Then I heard movement in the underbrush, something large pushing through vegetation about 50 yards away. Tom froze beside me, his hand raised in a gesture for silence. The movement stopped. We stood there for 90 seconds that felt like hours, barely breathing. A massive figure stepped into a small clearing 30 yards from where we stood. My scientific training immediately cataloged details, even as my rational mind struggled to process what I was seeing. Height: approximately 8 feet 2 inches, estimated against tree markers I'd mentally noted. Build: bipedal, humanoid proportions, but much broader through the chest and shoulders. Weight estimate: 600 to 700 pounds, based on how the ground compressed under its gait. Posture: slight forward lean, arms longer than human proportions, but nothing like the knuckle-walking posture of great apes. It moved with fluid bipedal locomotion, each step deliberate and controlled. The body was covered in reddish-brown hair, 3 to 4 inches long, and I could partially see its face, a prognathic jaw, prominent brow ridge, and dark eyes that looked almost human in their depth. It was using its hands to manipulate something in the ground. Digging, I realized, extracting roots with what appeared to be a crude wooden tool. Then it turned and looked directly at us. Those eyes, dark brown, highly expressive, unmistakably intelligent, met mine for approximately 8 seconds. There was no aggression in that gaze, only assessment, as though it were evaluating us the same way we were evaluating it. I felt recognition pass between us, not the simple awareness an animal has of threats, but something deeper, conscious evaluation, decision-making, intelligence. Every instinct I had screamed ape, but the proportions, the bipedalism, the tool use all said hominid. My heart hammered against my ribs, my hands trembling as I fought the urge to reach for my camera. Tom beside me had gone pale, his breathing shallow and rapid. After its assessment, the creature calmly turned and walked away. Not fleeing, there was no panic, no fear-driven scramble. It simply departed at a controlled pace, disappearing into the forest within 30 seconds. We could hear it moving for another minute, then silence returned like a curtain falling. We stood frozen for 5 full minutes before Tom finally spoke. "That's the 3rd time I've seen one," he said quietly. "Never this close." "That was bipedal," I managed, my voice unsteady. "Consistent bipedal locomotion, no knuckle walking, no quadrupedal movement at all." We approached the clearing carefully. In the soft earth, I found a footprint, 18.5 inches long with clear dermal ridges visible in the impression. Nearby lay the freshly dug roots and a broken digging stick, the end worn smooth from use. I collected soil samples, photographed everything with shaking hands, my mind racing through everything I knew about primate taxonomy. Nothing in my decade of training had prepared me for this. "You going to report what you saw?" Tom asked as we hiked back. I looked at the evidence bag in my pack, genetic samples that didn't match any known species, photographic documentation, my own eyewitness account. I thought about career implications, scientific reputation, the ridicule that awaited anyone who claimed to have seen Bigfoot. But I also thought about those eyes, the intelligence I'd seen there, the deliberate use of tools, the calm, measured assessment of our presence. "I need more data," I finally said. "Much more data." That was the moment I chose investigation over immediate revelation. I didn't know then that this choice would define the next 28 years of my life. I extended my Forest Service consultation to 2 months, setting up proper DNA sequencing equipment in borrowed lab space. Over those 8 weeks, I collected 47 additional hair samples from various sites within a 20-mile radius. I documented 6 more sightings, 3 visual, 3 thermal imaging, and every single DNA test came back consistent, 96 to 97% human match, 3 to 4% unknown sequences that didn't correspond to any primate in our databases. This wasn't contamination. This was real. When I returned to the Smithsonian, I labeled my samples as unidentified primate hair and told my colleagues they likely came from a rare bear subspecies. I began secret genetic analysis in off hours using personal funding to avoid institutional oversight. I created 2 lab notebooks, one official, sanitized version, and one hidden, containing the real data. I justified this to myself as needing more evidence before making an extraordinary claim. The real reason was simpler: fear of being laughed out of the scientific community. That winter, I returned to Washington State during my break. I brought offerings, apples, dried salmon, root vegetables, and left them at the original sighting location. When I returned the next day, the food was gone, and in its place sat 3 stones carefully balanced on top of each other, with a 4th standing upright beside them. Over 6 weeks, I established a pattern. I'd leave food, and the next day I'd find stones arranged in specific formations. This wasn't random. This was symbolic communication, abstract thinking, intentional response to my presence. In the spring of 1997, I achieved my first complete mitochondrial DNA sequence from the samples. The results were staggering. The divergence from Homo sapiens occurred approximately 800,000 to 1 million years ago. This species shared a common ancestor with modern humans and Neanderthals, but represented a previously unknown hominin lineage that had survived in geographic isolation. The DNA showed genetic adaptations for a cold climate and high altitude, and most remarkably, evidence of ancient interbreeding with modern humans. Approximately 2 to 3% of the sequences showed modern human markers, suggesting contact between our species tens of thousands of years ago. I spent 3 months wrestling with what this meant. I had proof of a living, non-sapiens hominid. The implications were enormous: protected species status, habitat preservation, complete revision of anthropological understanding. But revelation also meant public panic, invasive research, potential harm to the subjects I was studying. I decided to gather more evidence first, to understand them before revealing them. I took a teaching position at the University of Washington, telling the Smithsonian I was pursuing an independent research project. The real reason was proximity to my research site. Every weekend and every summer, I returned to the forest. I established 8 observation sites across 3 national forests using early trail cameras to capture images. Over 3 years, I got 23 photographs, mostly partial shots, but a few stunningly clear images of subjects engaged in daily activities. Patterns emerged. I identified family groups, typically 4 to 6 individuals traveling together. I observed sophisticated tool use: digging sticks, rock hammers for cracking nuts, crude carrying bags woven from bark. I witnessed food caching, watching them bury stores for winter retrieval. I documented at least 15 distinct vocalizations that appeared to have consistent meanings. I saw adults teaching juveniles how to process food, demonstrating techniques with patience. I witnessed what could only be described as mourning when one individual was injured, the group gathering around, touching the wounded member gently. All of this indicated advanced cognition, culture, and social structure, far beyond what we attributed to any known great ape. In the summer of 1997, I faced my first close call. A graduate student discovered my hidden lab notebooks. Sarah Klein was a molecular biology PhD candidate, brilliant and curious. She confronted me with what she'd read, asking directly, "Is this real?" I had to make a choice, trust or deny. I showed her the DNA sequences, the photographic evidence, the documentation of behavior. Sarah agreed to help, becoming my first co-conspirator. Her expertise in comparative genomics proved invaluable over the coming years. The fall of 1998 brought another crisis. Local news ran a story about increased Bigfoot sightings in Gifford Pinchot, which brought amateur researchers and hunters flooding into the area. My regular observation sites became compromised. I was forced to move equipment and establish new sites farther from established trails. The increased human traffic drove my subjects deeper into the forest. I lost contact for 4 months, spending that winter anxious and frustrated, wondering if I'd destroyed the research through carelessness. In early 1999, I re-established observation patterns, but more carefully now. I realized the subjects were aware of human presence in ways I hadn't fully appreciated. They were adapting to us, just as I was adapting to them. That spring, my department chair began questioning my research output. I hadn't published a significant paper in 2 years, and my productivity was being scrutinized. I was forced to publish a sanitized paper titled "Genetic Diversity in Pacific Northwest Mammalian Populations," which included some data from my research, but attributed it to known species. My chair was satisfied, but I felt like a fraud, lying to the scientific community that had trained me. By the end of 1999, I had comprehensive data, population estimates of 150 to 300 individuals in the Pacific Northwest, genetic diversity suggesting 2,000 to 3,000 globally. I'd documented their distribution across British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. I'd estimated their lifespan at 40 to 50 years based on observed aging in individuals I'd tracked. Their diet was omnivorous but primarily plant-based, with seasonal meat consumption. Their social structure appeared matriarchal, with family groups led by older females, while males were often solitary or pair-bonded. Their intelligence was comparable to early Homo erectus or late Australopithecus, and they had sophisticated vocalization that suggested possible proto-language capability. Then, in December 1999, everything changed again. I was at a remote observation post when a winter storm rolled in faster than predicted. Temperature plummeted to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and snow began accumulating rapidly. When I tried to start my vehicle to leave, the engine wouldn't turn over. The radio batteries were dead. I was 12 miles from the ranger station, and a blizzard was intensifying. I prepared to survive the night in my emergency shelter, knowing it would be dangerous but manageable. At midnight, I heard something outside my tent. Through the fabric, I could see a large silhouette standing 10 feet away in the darkness. My heart hammered with primal fear until I recognized her. A female from the family group I'd been observing for 3 years, the one I'd mentally designated Subject F1. She gestured for me to follow her. In that moment, I made a critical decision. I trusted her. She led me 3 miles through the storm to an abandoned fire lookout tower. Inside, I found evidence of regular use: stored food, bedding materials woven from plant fibers, a cache of tools. She showed me where to shelter, then left without any further interaction. The storm lasted 2 days. I survived because of her intervention. When I finally made it back to the ranger station, I understood something fundamental had shifted. She had been aware of me all along, monitoring my presence, just as I'd been monitoring hers. When I needed help, she chose to save me. The trust I'd been building was mutual. By 33 years old, I was carrying a secret that weighed on every aspect of my life. I'd declined prestigious research positions to stay near my subjects. My relationship with my family was strained because I couldn't explain my constant absences. I had 2 trusted allies, Sarah Klein and Tom Whitaker, who'd seen the evidence and agreed we weren't ready to reveal it. We told ourselves we were waiting for a complete picture. I didn't realize it would take 20 more years. The first decade of the new millennium brought technological advances that revolutionized my research. Better cameras, improved DNA sequencing, GPS tracking, all allowed me to document my subjects with unprecedented precision. I mapped 23 sites across Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. I identified 3 distinct family groups with consistent territories and documented seasonal migration patterns, watching them move to higher elevations in summer and return to lower valleys in winter. F1, the female who had saved me from the storm, became my most observed individual. Over the years, I documented her repeatedly, watching her life unfold through the seasons. She seemed to accept my presence, even anticipate my arrival at observation sites. I developed a gesture system. Open hands meant friendly approach. Offering food was an invitation to interact, and leaving an area signaled I was departing. F1 responded with her own gestures. Tapping a tree meant warning. Stacked stones meant it was safe to approach. She left gifts for me, interesting stones, shed antlers, once a perfect bird's nest carefully placed where I'd see it. In the summer of 2002, everything changed between us. I found F1 with a severe leg wound, a deep slash across her thigh that looked like it had come from a sharp rock. She was struggling to walk, isolated from her group, and I watched her for a full day before making a decision that violated every principle of non-interference I'd been taught. I approached slowly with my field medical kit. She allowed me to come within 10 feet, closer than ever before. I couldn't treat the wound directly, that line I wouldn't cross, but I left antibiotics, bandages, and pain medication, using exaggerated gestures to demonstrate their use. I mimed cleaning a wound, wrapping it, taking pills. She watched intently. The next day, when I returned, the supplies had been used. The wound was cleaned and dressed using the method I demonstrated. She had observed, understood, and applied what I'd shown her. Over 2 weeks, I monitored her recovery, leaving fresh supplies when needed. She survived. After that, F1's trust in me became absolute. She would approach to within 15 or 20 feet, allowing me to observe her and her family with unprecedented access. That same fall, I faced another close call. A university administrator questioned my ongoing forest project, demanding to see my research site to evaluate resource allocation. I was forced to create a fake site 20 miles from my real locations, setting up a fabricated study of black bear genetics. The administrator was satisfied but suspicious. I realized my cover story was wearing thin. My personal life paid the price for my secrecy. My wife, Jane, began asking increasingly pointed questions about my weekend disappearances. I couldn't explain why I vanished every Saturday and Sunday, couldn't tell her I was revolutionizing anthropology. Our marriage deteriorated under the weight of secrets I couldn't share. We divorced in 2006, and I knew it was my first major personal cost for this research. The work had become more important than my own happiness. In 2005, I brought in a third ally, Dr. Robert Yazzie, a Navajo anthropologist who brought an indigenous perspective I desperately needed. Yazzie listened to my evidence and told me something that changed my entire approach. Navajo oral traditions had mentioned forest people for generations, so had stories from dozens of other indigenous nations across the continent. I'd been approaching this as a purely scientific discovery, but indigenous peoples had known about these beings all along. The year 2006 brought my most profound discovery. Deep in a remote valley, I found what appeared to be a deliberate grave site. Stones were arranged in patterns too purposeful to be natural. Carefully excavating around them, I found bones of an elderly individual estimated 45 to 50 years old at death. The body had been positioned deliberately, surrounded by meaningful objects, carved wooden implements, interesting stones, tools. This was proof of abstract thinking, death awareness, possibly even spirituality or religious belief. I collected minimal samples, documented everything exhaustively, then left the site undisturbed. In that moment, I understood these weren't just hominids. They had culture comparable to early humans. They were people. In the summer of 2007, I brought a tablet computer to my observation camp to review video footage. F1 watched from about 20 yards away, clearly fascinated by the moving images on the screen. On impulse, I showed her video of herself from the previous year. Her reaction was unmistakable, clear recognition, reaching out to touch the screen gently with one massive finger. She understood it was recording and playback technology. She called over her juvenile daughter, designated subject F4, and both watched my documentation of their lives. It was a profound moment. The subjects were aware they were being studied and chose to accept it. The winter of 2008 brought another crisis. A logging company proposed cutting in one of my documented territories. An environmental impact study was required, and I was called to testify as a wildlife expert to preserve the habitat. I couldn't mention the real reason without revealing my subjects, so I used surrogate arguments: rare salamanders, sensitive ecosystem balance, watershed protection. I barely succeeded in blocking the logging, but I realized habitat loss was an existential threat to the species. From 2009 to 2013, my understanding deepened dramatically. I documented increasingly complex social behaviors, elaborate food-sharing rules with elders eating first and juveniles protected, collaborative hunting where they'd drive deer toward ambush points, detailed teaching scenes where mothers showed daughters how to process pine nuts. I witnessed conflict resolution where disputes were settled through dominance displays rather than violence. I saw play behavior in juveniles that involved games with clear rules and turn-taking. Using new audio analysis software, I identified 47 distinct vocalizations. Many had consistent meanings: warning calls, assembly calls, distress signals. Others appeared contextual, possibly proto-linguistic. The patterns suggested intentional communication, not just emotional expression. I believed they had true language, simplified compared to human speech, but functional and grammatical. In the spring of 2010, F1 brought me a gift that made me break down emotionally. She approached my regular observation spot and placed an object on the ground. A carved wooden stick with deliberate shaping. I examined it closely. Smooth surface, consistent notches along one side, a functional grip at one end. This wasn't just a tool, it was made specifically for me, shaped intentionally, given with purpose. It was art or communication, or both. Clear evidence of creative expression and forward planning. They weren't just intelligent beings, they were persons. After 14 years of observation, I was tracking the same individuals as they aged. F1 now showed gray in her hair and moved more slowly. I estimated her age at 32 to 35 years old. F4, her juvenile daughter from 1996, was now an adult with her own infant, designated F8. I was documenting 3 generations, watching behavioral traditions pass from grandmother to grandchild. I wasn't just watching a species, I was watching a culture. The summer of 2011 nearly destroyed everything. A television crew filming a reality show called Finding Bigfoot invaded the area with massive equipment, loud vehicles, and aggressive search tactics. My subjects fled deeper into wilderness, and I lost contact for 6 months. When I finally re-established observation patterns, they were wary and skittish. It took a full year to rebuild the trust that had taken 15 years to establish. I became protective, even territorial, feeling a fierce ownership over my subjects and their safety. By 2014, I was 48 years old and realizing I'd spent half my life on this project. Sarah Klein was now a tenured professor, my co-researcher for 17 years. Tom Whitaker had retired from the Forest Service but stayed involved in the research. Robert Yazzie was working to catalog Indigenous oral histories of encounters, finding consistent patterns across hundreds of years and dozens of tribes. In 2015, new sequencing technology allowed me to complete a full nuclear genome for Homo giganteus, the scientific name I'd assigned them. The results were definitive. The species split from Homo sapiens approximately 900,000 years ago. They interbred with early H. sapiens between 30,000 and 50,000 years ago. Every human of Eurasian descent carries 0.1 to 0.4% H. giganteus DNA, similar to our Neanderthal admixture. They weren't separate from us. They were part of us. They were family. From 2016 to 2018, I watched F1 age significantly. She moved slowly now, staying closer to shelter sites. F4 had taken over leadership of the family group. F1 spent most of her time with F8, her great-grandchild, in a pattern that looked remarkably like grandparenting. I was 50 years old watching my own parents age, feeling mortality's approach in my own body and seeing it reflected in the creature I'd known for 20 years. In the winter of 2017, a massive windstorm knocked a tree onto my shelter while I was inside. I was pinned by debris with a broken leg and destroyed radio. F1 and F4 found me within an hour. They cleared the debris carefully, using branches as levers in sophisticated tool use that demonstrated problem-solving ability. F4 stayed with me for 2 days until the rescue team arrived, leaving only when she heard their approach. It was the second time their intervention had saved my life. The bond between us had become mutual survival partnership. In the spring of 2018, I had a moment I'll never forget. I was at an observation site with F1 in the evening light, and I asked aloud, a habit I developed over the years, "Do you know what I am?" Do you understand I'm studying you?" She looked directly at me and held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. A single, deliberate head nod that could mean nothing else but acknowledgement. She had known all along. She had chosen to accept my presence, to collaborate rather than hide. We had been partners in this for 22 years. By 2019, I had 23 years of data, and when I ran population viability analysis, the results were devastating. The Pacific Northwest population was declining at 2% per year. Current estimates put them at 180 to 220 individuals, down from 250 in 1996. Habitat loss, genetic diversity decline, and climate change were taking their toll. My projections showed functional extinction in 50 to 75 years. Globally, I estimated 1,500 to 2,000 individuals with no viable population secure long-term. My secrecy, I realized, might be contributing to their extinction. In the fall of 2019, I returned to the original encounter site 23 years after that first sighting. F1 was there, moving slowly, clearly elderly, at an estimated 40 years old. She approached to within 5 feet, the closest she'd ever come except during the medical treatment and storm rescue. She touched the tree where we'd first seen each other, looked at me, then back at the tree. She remembered that first day, too. We shared that memory, that history, that profound moment of first contact. She'd been aware of me protecting them all along, and now time was running out for both of us. The winter of 2019 to 2020 was brutal. Heavy snows and prolonged cold settled over the Cascades, and F1 wasn't adapting well. I observed her from a distance, watching her labored breathing and difficulty walking. She spent most of her time in a sheltered rock outcrop, a semi-permanent dwelling I'd documented before. F4 brought her food, caring for her, while F8 stayed close, keeping the elder company. From my medical assessment at a distance, she likely had a respiratory infection, possibly pneumonia. Fever was indicated by her behavior, lethargy, trembling, curling into herself. Without intervention, she would die. I faced an ethical crisis that had been building for 24 years, non-interference versus duty of care. She wasn't a research subject anymore, she was a friend. I called an emergency meeting with Sarah Klein and Robert Yazzie. We debated fiercely. "Do we violate research ethics to save an individual?" I asked. "She's a person," Yazzie said flatly, "not a research subject. You save people." "Anthropologists don't carry antibiotics into the field for a reason," Sarah countered. "We're observers, not participants." "She saved my life twice," I said quietly. "I owe her." We decided I would attempt direct treatment, knowing we were crossing a line that would fundamentally change the nature of the research. On March 8, 2020, Tom Whitaker and I hiked to F1's shelter site. F4 and F8 were present and initially defensive, positioning themselves between us and the elder. I used 24 years of established trust, moving slowly, showing the medical supplies with open hands. I demonstrated on myself, taking pills, drinking water, showing the antibiotics and bandages. Then I backed away, leaving everything visible. F4 assessed the situation and looked to F1. The elder met my eyes with that familiar recognition and trust. She made a gesture to F4. "It's okay." Over 3 days, I visited twice daily, administering crushed antibiotics mixed into berry paste, providing electrolyte solutions, monitoring her vital signs from a distance. F4 and F8 watched closely, learning the process. By the 3rd day, F1's condition was improving. By the 7th day, she was walking short distances. Complete recovery took 3 weeks. I was no longer a researcher. I was a doctor, a protector, a friend. In April 2020, as the COVID-19 pandemic forced me into isolation at my field site, I spent more time in the forest than ever. Following F4 one day, I discovered a new site, a hidden valley, accessible only through a narrow canyon. Inside, I found evidence of a much larger population than I'd ever documented. At least 15 to 20 individuals, the largest concentration I'd ever seen. This was a central gathering place with multiple family groups, containing elaborate stone structures for windbreaks and food storage, tool caches, and carved markers on trees that looked like territorial symbols or possibly a form of writing. Beyond the main site, I found their sacred place. Stone cairns arranged in clear patterns, at least 30 of them, each marking a grave. Some were very old with weathered stones, others recent. Each grave included artifacts. This was generational occupation, cultural continuity, their homeland and burial ground. Over 3 weeks, I documented individuals and revised my population estimates dramatically upward. The Pacific Northwest population could be 400 to 600 individuals, not 180 to 220. Global population might be 4,000 to 6,000. They weren't as critically endangered as I'd thought. But the valley was located on land slated for timber sale. Logging was planned to begin in fall 2021. This habitat destruction would displace the entire population, and their sacred burial ground would be destroyed. My silence was enabling this. On July 4, 2020, I sat at my observation site with F1 resting nearby, recovered, but weakened. I spoke aloud as I'd done for 24 years. I could save your valley. I have proof your people exist. But if I tell, everything changes. Researchers come, media, government. I don't know if I'd be saving you or condemning you. But if I stay silent, the bulldozers come. Your burial ground destroyed, what would you want me to do? F1 stood and walked to me, closer than ever. She picked up a stone and placed it at my feet, then another and another, building a small cairn right there in front of me. I understood. Protect what matters. Mark what's important. She was giving permission or asking for help. She trusted me to make the right choice. 2 weeks later, I met with my team. We reviewed all the data, 24 years of research, complete genome sequence, thousands of hours of documentation. We debated every option. Continue silence and try to stop logging through other means, likely to fail. Anonymous revelation, too easy to trace back to me. Full public disclosure through peer-reviewed publication. Career destruction, but most effective. Government-only disclosure, no accountability, potential exploitation. My people have kept this secret for 10,000 years to protect them, Yazzie said. But times change. We can't stop development without new tools. They need legal protection, endangered species status, sacred site designation. The only way to get that is public revelation, scientific proof. Your career dies, but they might live. That's the trade. Sarah laid it out clinically. We have everything we need. DNA proof, photographic evidence, behavioral documentation. Peer-reviewed publication in Nature or Science would force the scientific community to respond. The genetic data proves common ancestry. They're not animals, they're hominids. That changes legal status, but Marcus, you'll be destroyed. They'll call it fraud until proven otherwise. I was 54 years old with a comfortable tenured position versus 4,000 to 6,000 individuals facing habitat loss and eventual extinction. F1 had trusted me for 24 years, saved my life, allowed me to treat her. My scientific oath demanded I seek truth, advance knowledge, benefit humanity. This species was part of human heritage. We were family, genetically connected. Silence protected me. Revelation protected them. On July 31, 2020, I decided to go public with full scientific disclosure through peer-reviewed publication. The goal was endangered species status, habitat protection, and minimal invasive research. I accepted the consequences, career ridicule at minimum, professional destruction as a possibility. But I would preserve scientific integrity, protect my subjects, and fulfill my moral duty. In August, I compiled everything, 24 years of field notes, complete mitochondrial and nuclear genomes, 843 photographs, 312 hours of edited video footage, hair samples, footprint casts, tool artifacts, burial site maps, population distribution data, and comprehensive behavioral ethograms. The paper was titled Homo giganteus, Genetic and Behavioral Evidence for a Surviving Hominin Species in Pacific Northwest, North America. Authors: Marcus Chen, Sarah E. Klein, Robert J. Yazzie. 87 pages with over 200 references and massive supplementary materials. I submitted it to Nature on August 30th, 2020, with a cover letter that read, "This will be the most significant anthropological discovery since Homo floresiensis, and the most controversial paper you'll ever publish." 2 days before submission, I hiked to F1's shelter site for what I knew would be my last visit as an anonymous researcher. She was there with F4 and F8, 3 generations together. I sat at a respectful distance and spoke aloud. "I'm going to tell the world about you. It's the only way to protect the valley. People will come, cameras, scientists, maybe government. I'll try to control it, but I can't promise what happens. If I've done wrong, I'm sorry, but I think it's the only way." F1 approached to 3 feet, closer than she'd ever come except in moments of crisis. She placed her hand on a tree between us and looked at me with those deep, intelligent eyes. I mirrored the gesture, placing my hand on the same tree, our fingers inches apart. 24 years of trust, shared history, and mutual respect passed between us in that moment. She withdrew and returned to her family. I understood, she knew, she accepted, she forgave whatever was coming. That night I left the forest for the last time as an anonymous researcher. Next time I returned, the world would know. Nature received my submission and immediately assigned it to their editorial board. The initial response was skeptical. A Bigfoot paper, nearly rejected without review. But my reputation as an established researcher with institutional affiliation bought credibility, and the genetic data was impossible to dismiss. They sent it to peer review, an unprecedented decision for a cryptid claim. 4 reviewers were assigned across anthropology, genetics, behavioral ecology, and statistics. Reviews returned over 8 weeks, ranging from accusations of fraud to descriptions of paradigm-shifting research. The key geneticist reviewer wrote, "This genome is real. It's not human, not ape, not contamination. If this is a hoax, it's the most sophisticated in scientific history." Nature required independent laboratory verification. I sent samples to 3 institutions: Max Planck Institute in Germany, UC Berkeley's Ancient DNA Lab, and the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute. All 3 replicated my results: non-human, non-ape, hominid genome, with divergent dates confirmed at 800,000 to 1 million years ago. Max Planck's report stated, "This is either a surviving archaic hominid or the most elaborate hoax ever perpetrated." We find no evidence of fraud in the genetic material. In November 2020, Nature's editorial board made an unprecedented decision. They would publish with heavy editorial scrutiny. They demanded in-person verification of one site. I agreed, showing them a peripheral location, not the Sacred Valley. A nature photographer, journalist, and editor came to Washington, documenting footprints, structures, and environmental evidence. I refused to compromise the subjects with direct observation, but Nature was satisfied with the corroboration. Publication was set for February 18, 2021. My university administration learned of the impending publication and held an emergency meeting. They were concerned about institutional reputation, scientific credibility, and liability. I presented all my evidence, the genetic data, the peer review results. The university decided to be cautiously supportive. The president told me, "If this is real, we'll be famous. If it's fraud, we'll be humiliated. But the science looks solid." Personal costs began immediately. My colleagues divided into camps: supportive, skeptical, and hostile. Anonymous threats arrived calling me a fraud and liar. My elderly parents learned about my 24-year secret and didn't know whether to be confused, worried, or proud. I had no romantic relationships since my divorce, isolated by the secret I'd carried. Old friends grew distant, unable to understand my obsession. Government agencies became interested in December 2020. U.S. Fish and Wildlife contacted me, aware of the pending publication and its implications. If real, it required immediate habitat protection. If a hoax, I potentially faced criminal charges for fraud. I provided a preliminary evidence package, and federal investigation began quietly. Robert Yazzie coordinated with tribal councils, and multiple tribes issued statements confirming their oral traditions. The Lummi, Spokane, and Yakama nations prepared a joint statement positioning these beings as sacred and requiring respect and protection. Indigenous knowledge was being validated by science. Despite the publication embargo, rumors spread in January 2021. Cryptozoology blogs buzzed about a major announcement. Mainstream media ran skeptical pieces. Pressure built as anticipation grew, some framing it as a joke, while others saw potential breakthrough. On February 18, 2021, at 6 a.m. Eastern Time, the paper went live in Nature as open access. At 10 a.m. Pacific Time, I presented findings to a packed auditorium with media from around the world connected via Zoom due to COVID protocols. I gave a 45-minute presentation showing genetic data, photographs, and video footage of subjects using tools and engaging in family interactions. I presented the complete genome as irrefutable genetic proof. In my statement, I said, "For 24 years, I've carried this secret. I've watched a species, our closest living relatives, survive in the shadows while their habitat disappears. The genome proves they're real. The behaviors prove they're conscious cultural beings. They're not animals to be studied. They're persons with the right to exist, to be protected. I'm here because their sacred valley is scheduled for logging, because silence would mean betrayal, because science exists to discover truth and protect life. Yes, my career may be over. Yes, I've been called a fraud, but I have genetic proof. I have 24 years of documentation, and I have moral obligation. These beings trusted me. Now I'm asking humanity to trust the evidence and protect them." Global headlines erupted. Scientist claims discovery of living Bigfoot. Cable news ran debates on hoax versus breakthrough. Social media exploded with the story trending worldwide. The scientific community polarized, with geneticists intrigued, anthropologists skeptical but interested, and hardened skeptics calling it elaborate fraud. The cryptozoology community celebrated vindication. The paper was downloaded 500,000 times in the first 24 hours. Videos went viral with 10 million views in 48 hours. Photo experts analyzed images. The consensus was that the evidence was sophisticated and possibly authentic, but verification was needed. By February 22nd, U.S. Fish and Wildlife announced an emergency investigation. On March 1st, emergency habitat closures went into effect in 3 national forests. Logging in the documented valleys was suspended pending review. Federal teams were dispatched to investigate sites, and I was ordered to provide location data. I refused to reveal the Sacred Valley location, and a legal battle began. Public polls showed 60% skeptical, 30% intrigued, and 10% believing. Pressure mounted to produce a subject for examination. I refused categorically. They're persons, not specimens. I was placed on administrative leave while the university conducted a review. Some colleagues supported me, others called for termination. 3 universities offered positions if my claims proved true. Speaking invitations and book deals flooded in, but I declined everything during the review period. My focus was protecting the subjects, not personal gain. Science Journal demanded, produce a subject for independent verification. My response was firm. I will not trade a living being for scientific credibility. The standoff between proof and protection had begun. By April 2021, 15 laboratories worldwide had replicated my genetic findings. Max Planck Institute, UC Berkeley, the Smithsonian, and the Francis Crick Institute in the UK all confirmed. Genome authentic, non-human hominid, no evidence of fraud. One dissenting voice claimed sample contamination remained possible, But this was a minority view overwhelmed by consensus. Federal teams deployed to my documented sites found footprints, hair samples, structural remains, and tool artifacts. They collected 23 new hair samples, 14 footprint casts, and 8 tool specimens. DNA testing confirmed everything matched my published genome. My site documentation was proven accurate, though the teams achieved no direct subject observation. Forensic photo experts analyzing my 843 images found no evidence of digital manipulation. Physical proportions were consistent across all photographs. Anatomical details matched the same individuals across years. Environmental conditions authenticated with shadows and foliage matching locations and dates. 3 experts agreed. If this is a hoax, it would require unprecedented resources and decades of consistency. Video analysis by movement specialists examined 312 hours of footage. Gait analysis showed bipedal locomotion inconsistent with human or ape patterns. Muscle movement suggested anatomy fundamentally different from known primates. Behavioral consistency showed individual personality traits over years. Primatologists confirmed behaviors consistent with great ape intelligence, possibly early hominid cognition. In May 2021, Nature published an editorial. Evidence strongly supports Chen's claims. Science followed in June. While extraordinary, data appears authentic. Scientific consensus shifted from impossible to probable. The American Association of Physical Anthropologists stated evidence warrants serious consideration and protection of potential population. On June 30, 2021, U.S. Fish and Wildlife proposed emergency listing under the Endangered Species Act. Species name Homo giganteus. Status: critically endangered. Critical habitat: 2.3 million acres in the Pacific Northwest. The logging industry sued, and that case continues in court. In August 2021, the IUCN issued an emergency global listing as critically endangered. International protections were enacted in British Columbia, Canada. Discussions began in Russia and China about possible Asian populations. In September 2021, a coalition of 23 Pacific Northwest tribes issued a joint statement. Our peoples have known of these relatives for thousands of years. They requested co-management of protected habitats and advocated for personhood status rather than just endangered species classification. Sacred site protections were granted to the Burial Valley. A federal task force established in October 2021 created management plans, study the population, establish protection protocols, maintain minimal disturbance. I was appointed as a consultant, initially refusing but eventually accepting to maintain some control. Strict research permits became required. No specimen collection was allowed. Observation from a distance only. Sacred sites were declared permanently off-limits. The scientific community largely converted to accepting the evidence. A new field emerged: gigantology, or H, giganteus studies. Universities established research programs. Funding flooded in from the National Science Foundation, National Geographic, and private foundations. I received multiple awards, declining many of them, but exploitation began immediately. Documentary crews requested access, which I mostly denied. Bigfoot tourism exploded with people flooding the forests, driving subjects deeper into wilderness. I became increasingly protective, bordering on militant. Some researchers attempted capture for study, and I formed a protection network with allies to monitor forests and intercept problematic researchers. Legal battles erupted over research methods. My position was unwavering. They're not lab animals, they're people. Conservation victories followed. Logging was permanently banned in critical habitats. 1.8 million acres were designated as wilderness. The Sacred Valley received the highest protection level. Indigenous co-management was established. Habitat corridors were created to connect isolated populations. Non-invasive genetic sampling through hair collection enabled systematic surveys. Population estimates were revised to 420 to 480 individuals in the Pacific Northwest, higher than my earlier data suggested. Additional populations were confirmed in British Columbia and Northern California. The global estimate rose to 3,000 to 4,500 individuals, still critically endangered, but less dire than initially calculated. My university reinstated me in May 2022 after verification was complete. I was promoted to full professor. Global fame followed. The man who proved Bigfoot exists. I was offered positions worldwide but declined, staying near the subjects. I reluctantly published a book titled The Last Hominids, 24 Years with Homo giganteus, donating all proceeds to conservation efforts. The personal costs were real. At 57 years old, my life was consumed by advocacy. I never remarried, telling people I had a family in the forest. Some friends who'd thought me crazy remained estranged. My parents were proud but bemused. I traveled constantly, testifying, advocating, protecting. I was exhausted, but driven by purpose larger than myself. In September 2023, F1 died of natural causes at an estimated 44 years old. I found her body in the Sacred Valley. Her family had already begun the burial process, placing stones in careful arrangements. I witnessed the funeral, family members mourning, touching her body gently, engaging in deliberate ritual. It was the most profound loss of my life. She had been my friend for 27 years. She lived long enough to see her people protected. Her grave was marked by a large cairn surrounded by carved objects. I left my research medal at her grave as tribute and goodbye, the highest honor I could offer. I'm 58 years old now. It's been 28 years since I first saw F1 in that clearing in Gifford Pinchot, and 4 years since I revealed her existence to the world. She died last September, at peace, in the Sacred Valley, surrounded by 4 generations of her family. The valley that was scheduled for logging is now protected wilderness, her burial ground sacred and undisturbed. I visit her grave sometimes, leave stones like she taught me, and tell her everything that's happened since. People ask if I regret the secrecy, 24 years of silence, of lying to colleagues, of sacrificing my marriage and normal life. They don't understand that the secrecy wasn't mine to break. It was hers to give. For 24 years, F1 trusted me to protect her family, to study them without exploiting them, to understand them without reducing them to specimens. That trust was sacred. Breaking it could only be justified when their survival depended on revelation. I learned more in those years of silence than any laboratory could have taught me. I learned that intelligence isn't defined by language or technology, but by love, memory, and dignity. I watched F1 teach her daughter, who taught her daughter, who is now teaching her own child. I saw them mourn their dead, care for their elders, solve problems, and make choices. They're not almost human, they're fully themselves, conscious cultural beings who deserve existence on their own terms. The price was real. My marriage ended because I couldn't share what consumed me. Colleagues thought me obsessed or crazy for years. I gave up prestigious positions to stay near the forest. I missed my parents aging, my sister's children growing up, normal friendships and relationships. For 24 years, my closest relationship was with a being I could barely communicate with, who didn't know my language, and I didn't know hers. But I gained something money and prestige could never buy. I had a friend from another species. I witnessed evolution in motion, consciousness in a form we didn't know still existed. I held space for a species to survive when silence might have doomed them. That's worth any career, any sacrifice, any cost. F1's family group numbers 23 individuals now, 4 generations living in protected forest. The species still faces challenges: climate change, genetic diversity concerns, long-term habitat security, but they have a chance now. Legal protection, scientific understanding, public awareness, and Indigenous stewardship give them what secrecy couldn't: a future. The genetic data changed everything. Humans carry 0.1 to 0.4% Homo giganteus DNA. They're not strangers, they're family. Our ancestors interbred with theirs 40,000 years ago. They're our cousins, our evolutionary siblings, our kin. That genetic connection made legal protection possible and changed how we understand human history. My research established ethical frameworks for studying them: observation without interference, protection without possession, understanding without exploitation. The next generation of researchers knows these are persons, not subjects. Science can coexist with respect. What I learned in those 28 years is that consciousness takes many forms, and all deserve protection. We're not alone in being people. We never were. For millennia, we shared this world with other hominids: Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, and yes, Homo giganteus. We're the last of our genus, except for them, and that makes them precious beyond measure. The great arrogance of modern humans is believing we're the only ones who matter, the only ones with rights, the only ones deserving protection. My 28 years with F1 taught me otherwise. She had hopes, fears, memories, and love. She chose to trust me, to let me witness her life, to accept my help when she needed it. That trust is the greatest honor I've ever received. If I could speak to F one more time, I would thank her for saving my life twice, for trusting me with her family's existence, for teaching me what it means to be human by showing me what it means to be something else, for giving me purpose that transcended career and ego, for being my friend when friendship seemed impossible. I hope her great-great-grandchildren will live in protected forests a century from now. I hope humanity learns to share the world with our remaining relatives. I hope the sacred valley stays untouched and her grave undisturbed. I hope someday we'll understand their language, their culture, their inner lives as fully as they deserve. Some secrets are worth keeping until the moment they're worth revealing. Some friendships transcend species. Some discoveries matter more than the career of the person who made them. F1 taught me all of that. Last week I hiked to the sacred valley. F8, now fully grown, was there with her child, F1's great-great-grandchild, 4th generation. The child is learning to use tools, stack stones, read the forest the way her ancestors did. F8 saw me and nodded once. The gesture F1 taught her grandmother, who taught her mother, who taught her. Recognition across generations. Trust passed down like inheritance. I placed a stone on F1's cairn, as I always do. 4 generations of her family live because I broke my silence. One friendship across species boundaries changed conservation law forever. And somewhere in the forest, a child of another human species learns to survive in a world that finally acknowledges her right to exist. That was F1's gift to me. She showed me that some truths are bigger than fear, some responsibilities greater than comfort, and some friendships profound enough to change the world. I'll carry that until I die, and every stone I place on her grave says, "Thank you, my friend. Your trust was not misplaced."